Welcome back, folks. I ended the last lecture thinking about modern ideas on wisdom, modern ways in which we've tried to think about what the heck wisdom is. Different confusions that are very prominent. I've tried to give you like a broad selection of different authors and different groups of authors that have done their very best to try to pinpoint what the heck is wisdom. They get it, some of it is right, and then it's kind of confused, and then, they're wrestling here, right? And I ended with Dewey, and I don't know, Dewey kind of gets under my skin a little bit. So I thought I would leave it there, but then I thought, no, I better tell you about Glenn Gray. Glenn Gray is interesting. I think he's worth reading. You'll enjoy him. My favorite book by him, this book called The Warriors. It's really great. Glenn Gray, he was a soldier, so he, like Marcel, would have seen firsthand some of the horrors of the way in which the 20th century anyway was just a time divested of any wisdom whatsoever, it seems, en masse. And that's probably why he was thinking so much about what is the meaning of wisdom. So he's got this. He's got another wonderful book. It's called the Promise of Wisdom, and he's not really a fan of Dewey so much. So I mean, he's got different things to say about why Dewey's wrong, but then he struggles with things himself too. So let me give you a quick lowdown on Glenn Gray, and then we'll call it a day on the modern thinkers on wisdom, because I think Glenn Gray is a good representative of some of the struggles that even to this day we still are confused by. Okay, where Dewey denies our ability genuinely to see and to engage with what is via theoria, focusing instead upon our ability to know the world as object through our work, that is, through the manipulation and change of things. In his wonderful book, The Promise of Wisdom, the philosopher Glenn Gray seeks to reclaim a role for the theoria, or seeing, in education. And he criticizes pragmatists like Dewey, as well as North American education in general, for always being intent primarily on doing rather than seeing. Gray's assessment of American society in this regard isn't dissimilar to Gabriel Marcel's, as he stood in the wreckage of Vienna, pondering the remarks of the American soldier who couldn't understand why the destruction of ancient reverenced buildings posed a significant existential difficulty for him. What's going on here? Sorry about that. Moreover, Gray is under no illusions that the ills of American society could be solved by a knowing that, like Dewey's knowing, is simply an outcome of activity bringing about certain changes in the environment. Indeed, part of the difficulty that Gray wrestles with, that doesn't seem to be much of a problem for Dewey, is with the pace of progress of knowledge on the one hand, and yet the concomitant failure of that knowledge to bring us any greater happiness on the other. Unlike Dewey, who seeks to liberate us from the idea of education as leisured contemplation of what is, viewing this notion as undemocratic and founded on external teloi and not grounded in pragmatic experiential concerns, Gray's entire quandary, in his own philosophic investigation of education, is to find a way back to wisdom or Sophia, classically understood. Now, Gray begins his inquiry by delineating the two traditional senses of wisdom as being practical, on the one hand, and theoretical, on the other. Practical wisdom, again, phronesis, he points out, enables a person to apply his or her learning and knowledge to the enrichment of daily activities. Through the exercise of practical wisdom, an individual might exhibit excellence or virtue in the conduct of life. Moreover, Gray points out that among the Greeks, the wise man was held necessarily also to be an effective citizen, one in control of his appetites, and able to live a good life guided by reason. Theoretical wisdom, or Sophia, by contrast, involved the search for truth about the world and our place in it. According to Gray, such wisdom is embodied in, quote, the vision of the pure scientist or researcher, the philosopher, and the man of great intellectual power who are concerned with knowing things for their own sake. This sort of wisdom comes from study and reflection and is the product of leisure and freedom from the daily life of vocation and association with others of quite different concerns. Such theoretical wisdom involves long continued intellectual discipline, inherited ability, and a passion for truth, however unpleasant and impractical. This wisdom, however, does not teach a man how to find his way home, says Gray. It doesn't make him practically effective as a family man, as a citizen, or a community leader. However, Gray remarks that Aristotle, at least, felt that it didn't make a man supremely self-sufficient and even godlike, for it enabled him to retrace the thoughts of God after him. Okay, so these are Gray's thoughts on the distinction between practical wisdom and theoretical wisdom. You know, he thinks that both have deficiencies. And he thinks basically here, that wisdom, or Sophia, makes man kind of useless. It doesn't really allow him to take care of himself. So, I have some problems, I think, with Gray. I think the first problem that I would say Gray struggles with here is that he conflates pure theoretical knowledge with Sophia. I don't think they're the same thing. I think he thinks they're the same. Gray has equated Sophia, or theoretical wisdom, with pure science, pure research, or knowledge for its own sake. This confusion arises for Gray on two counts. First is the notion of a kind of knowledge that is its own justification. In ancient thought, knowledge of the good itself, or of God, was the only knowledge that was truly good for its own sake. All other knowledge of knowable things was only a shadow or a complete image of this true good, and it was for the sake of knowing this final good that all things ultimately were known. Hence, Gray's supposition, which we now take for granted as truth, about pure research or pure science as the height of knowing for its own sake, that is, science or research not harnessed in the service of some other prescribed finite end or worldly ambition, are not, strictly speaking, correct by ancient standards. For although pure science or pure research is not conducted with an extrinsic worldly purpose in mind, it nonetheless is distinct from Sophia and its objects, which are of a finitely good rather than an infinitely good nature. A second difficulty that Gray stumbles over in his definition of theoretical wisdom as pure science is the equivocation of the various senses of the word science and knowledge. Briefly, the word science, which connotes a particular study or method of inquiry into a specific field of knowledge, can also be used to connote our aspirations for knowledge or scientia about the highest things. However, the fields of study associated with the various sciences, even in their pure, that is to say, unharnessed to any extrinsic goal form, are not the same as that science which seeks to know the highest things. On these two counts, Gray finds himself confused. For when Sophia is simply treated as a science like any other science, that is, through equivocated meanings, that seeks out knowledge for its own sake, meaning without distinguishing the nature of its objects, he's led to the strange conclusion that Sophia, left to its own devices, can wreak enormous havoc and destruction in the world through its disinterested inventiveness, such as the horrible weapons of the Second World War with which Gray was all too familiar as a soldier. See, if you think theoretical science is the same thing as wisdom, folks, look at that big mushroom cloud there. That's the product of theoretical science. And Gray looks at that and he says, wisdom is screwed up, right? That's essentially the confusion here. Gray finds himself in a terrible bind because of this confusion about Sophia. Unlike Dewey, he refuses to reject either theoria or the possibility of Sophia. He recognizes that without the possibility of theoria, of beholding that which is, there is no real and true seeing. There can be no true community or communion with that which is. In effect, without the ability, one that is not an elitist attribute, but available to every human being to gaze upon, we're all left in an unhappy state like Faust and Ivan Ilyich, even with all the learning in the world. In Gray's view, to renew the struggle to achieve involvement and intimacy with this larger natural and human environment is surely the fuller meaning of the educational adventure. Alright, so he thinks that this is the secret to education, to renew the struggle to achieve involvement and intimacy with this larger natural and human environment. Put somewhat differently, Gray suggests that education requires theoria, since theoria is the manner of unmediated involvement and intimacy with the cosmos of what is. So it has its place in education, says Gray. He's really disagreeing there with Dewey. And Gray notes that theoria is not to be understood as something elitist or so sublime that it is only available to a few of us. Again, point of contention there with Dewey and Lawson, right? Rather, everyone is capable of gazing upon the cosmos, being to various degrees. However, the bind arises for Gray when he supposes alongside this ancient understanding of theoria and Sophia that any knowledge for its own sake, whether that be pure science or pure research or pure enjoyment of love for one another, is the same thing as Sophia, and that it attains to the same object. For then, Sophia is indeed a kind of knowledge incapable of guiding itself, of finding its way home, as Gray suggests, and it therefore stands in need of practical wisdom, or Sophia, or phronesis to guide it, rather. The impotence of Sophia, necessitated by modern assumptions about its nature, pushes Gray into other confusions and causes him difficulties that force him to retrace some of his steps, causing him to fall into contradictions about Sophia. First, due to Sophia's inability to guide itself home, Gray admits that both prudence and Sophia are needed. Here's a quote. The danger in such a separation is patent in our times, since so much of the theoretical at present lies in the natural sciences. Our creative scientists are discovering, often with agonized consciences, that their most pure and apparently remote theories are capable of practical and destructive application by technology. Unless they assume some responsibility for the application of theory, the theoretical life may become its own destroyer. See? If Gray is correct, Sophia needs prudence to avoid her misuse. And prudence needs Sophia in order to establish community and connection with the cosmos of being. In Gray's words, though we cannot unite the two kinds of wisdom, they must learn to support and to supplement each other. So Sophia is the thing that we need in order to feel communion and oneness with the rest of creation, or as the Greeks would call it, the cosmos, the good order. And phronesis is what we need, says he, in order to make use of that knowledge properly so that we don't blow ourselves up real good. Kind of a confusion I'm suggesting. But if Gray's elucidation of wisdom is correct, then we're led to wonder. Number one, if theoretical wisdom or Sophia is in fact pure science or pure research in the sense of specialized pursuit of knowledge for its own sake in a particular discipline or an area of investigation, then clearly not everyone is possessed of the ability to theorize. Wisdom and theory are quickly professionalized by such assumptions, right? As a result, Gray must both say and not say that theoria is a common human capacity. He must both say and not say that theoria is an elitist activity. And like both Dewey and Lawson, that the pursuit of Sophia is an undemocratic pastime, available only to a few, whereas practical wisdom or phronesis is a democratic virtue, available to the many. Number two, why would someone who had Sophia, or knowledge of the highest order, not also necessarily be in possession of prudence? How could someone having knowledge of the highest and greatest good not also thereby know how to live and how to act? So, Gray's exposition of Sophia leads us into these perplexities, ladies and gentlemen. One final comment is in order concerning Gray's elucidation of the promise of wisdom. This concerns his already discussed penchant for depth of understanding, for seeing, or gazing upon, and his view of education as establishing a community of being. That's big for Gray, right? That's why he loves this theoretic aspect. He does get it. He does get that that's what theoria is. It's this being able to actually see. He knows about the I, thou that Buber spoke about, that we've discussed already, right? This is what he says education is all about. Unlike Meacham, Gray would reject any calls for a sterilized, safe, or tragedy-free environment, as though these were the proper conditions for the creation of a wisdom atmosphere. Rather, Gray argues forcefully for the need to immerse students in unshielded experience of reality, in order that they might gain insight, self-knowledge, or truly engage in the activity of gazing. For how could one gaze upon reality if one's eyes were being shielded from it? Gray comments, the knowledge that moral skill demands is direct and first-hand. Our schools most necessarily deal in vicarious experience. And our homes, eager to shield children from unpleasant mistakes, tend to keep life at one remove as long as possible. Our mass media make us observers of other people's behavior, actual and make-believe, and foster the illusion that we know when we do not know. So, these are things I want you to keep in mind. We've gone through a good cross-section of modern views on wisdom. We can talk about those in class together. talking about some questions that you have or some comments. And then after this, we'll move on and we'll think a little bit more specifically about that aside. What are some of the ancient views of wisdom? And moving on from there, what are some of the medieval views of wisdom? And then moving on from there, we can even start to mesh those things together, looking at the ancient and medieval views. How can they inform our modern sensibilities about what thinking is and what wisdom is and what wisdom's pursuit is and these sorts of things, and how that all fits into school and school leisure. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.